River Revival, Working Together to Save the Minnesota River, is brought to you by the Minnesota Agricultural Water Resources Coalition, 15 farm organizations working together to improve water quality in the Minnesota River and throughout the state. River Revival is a production of the Water Resources Center at Minnesota State University, Mankato. Additional funding provided by the Minnesota River Board, the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Agricultural Drainage Management Coalition, the Minnesota River Valley Audubon Chapter, Barr Engineering Company, the Friends of the Minnesota Valley, and the Minnesota Valley Trust.
In the rapids, if you fall out, just stand up.
Come on down to the river.
These are all students from Montevideo High School.
Come on down with me.
We're gonna go down the Lackapaw River from Dawson to Lackapaw County Park.
Come on down to the river.
It's great just to get out on the river.
Running wild and being free.
Look at the beauty we have here.
Come on down to the river.
If you haven't been there, then you can't appreciate it the way you can if you paddled it, if you've seen all the wildlife that live on the sides.
Come on down to the river. Running wild and being free.
Butch Halterman teaches high school biology in Montevideo. Every summer since the early 1990s, he has taken students canoeing and camping on the rivers in the Minnesota River Valley.
What I wanted to do was inspire a new generation of young ecologists that understood the river and how important it is to us.
About the same time, Butch also helped start an organization in Montevideo called CURE, Clean Up the River Environment. This is CURE's 19th annual banquet.
I remember our very first meeting, it was Butch Halterman stood up and said, I have a band, we can play down by the river and we can raise money, and so boom, that's what we did. So we had our first river revival.
CURE is one of several citizen-led organizations working with farmers, government, and business enterprises to improve water quality in the Minnesota River.
That's the holy grail. How do we grow food without making the water dirty? And farmers are the key people that are going to figure it out. They're the most resourceful, inventive people I know.
As a fourth-generation farmer, I'm making decisions based not only on what is good financially or good business for today, I'm making decisions on what is good for future generations. I also think about, would my predecessors here be proud or happy with the way that I'm doing things?
In our travels up and down the Minnesota River Valley, we met hundreds of folks working together to save the Minnesota River from decades of abuse and neglect. It represents a cultural shift in our historical attitude toward rivers.
Rivers were treated like drainage ditches, garbage dumps, sewers. No, this is a prime recreation area. This is where the remnant of the wild still lives. We have to celebrate and get to know these places. So that's the cultural shift that I've seen happen in 20 years. And this is really important because it's how we think about things and how we regard them that changes our attitudes and our behaviors. The place where we start is that clean water is just a fundamental value for all Minnesotans. The second thing that I think that everybody understands is that it's everyone's responsibility to get clean water. And in the case of the Minnesota River, we've had a tremendous amount of people all working together doing something.
Thanks for coming.
Meet Ron Baldwin and his daughter Lori. They call themselves River Rangers.
It's a program to get young people and adults in the outdoors to see what beauty we have around us, walk the woods, see what it's like. The ultimate goals is that you're going to grow up to be good environmental citizens, right?
On a sunny October morning, they've come to see an incredible double waterfall at Minneopa State Park.
And even if you've seen it before, it still is one of the more impressive falls in the Minnesota River Valley.
A long, long time ago, a virgin wind began to blow, which in time would melt the snow, giving birth to a mighty river's flow.
Falls in the Minnesota River Valley that we're in were formed when the glaciers receded about 12,000 years ago.
In truth, the river has an extensive geological history, and to understand that history is to understand the Minnesota River. Geologist Carrie Jennings.
Place where the Jolly Green Giant campaign was designed, and it is a giant valley, and it's hard to appreciate if you've grown up here, but valleys like this just don't occur everywhere. What we're seeing is really the result of a catastrophic discharge of water from a very large glacial lake, a lake that was bigger than all the Great Lakes put together, that drained very suddenly, burst a dam of some sort near the town of Big Stone. A wall of water was sent down through kind of the central lowland in Minnesota. So if you look across the other side, a little bit above St. Peter where the campus is, that was the surface. So this is entirely new, this valley here between us and that town over there. It's over a mile wide at this point. You have now a valley in the landscape that's 150 feet plus below the surface where most of the streams are flowing. So as they come from that surface down into the valley, they have a lot of gravity actually speeding up the water, and we still have a lot of waterfalls along the edge of this valley where there's bedrock to kind of hold up that fall. But in other places where you just have a thick stack of glacial sediment, you get these very deep ravines. They deposit the sediment that they're moving into the valley here, and then eventually it gets deposited into Lake Pepin, which is kind of a local stopping point in Minnesota for all fine suspended sediment. You know, the silt and the clay that doesn't settle out of the water very easily. So it's natural for rivers to be cutting into this upper flat surface, depositing their sediment into the valley. What's not natural is the rate that that's happening now.
No, the river is the indicator of what's happening on the land. Societies rise and fall based on how well we take care of our topsoil. We are in a process where we've lost half of the topsoil we started with, you know, in less than 125 years of cultivation. So we're on a path towards desertification.
This is all the stuff it carries down.
Charles Smith is a young-looking 70-year-old who has lived just below Minnemissionona Falls his entire life. Over the years, he has seen and photographed the changes to the falls and his farm.
This was kind of the shallow end of the lake. There used to be about 7 or 8 feet of water in here. And then the edge of the lake was in here. It just all come down off the hillsides. But you're standing on 8, 9 feet of fill. Hard to believe that. But this was lake shore when I was a kid.
The state climatologist indicates that we're getting more convective storms of greater intensity rains, which means that the streams themselves have larger floods, have higher peak flows, and so they are more erosive.
The main problem here is the speed it comes down.
It seems to be the way we manage water that affects the river quality. It's not a surprise.
The green solid lines are new 6-inch.
They're tiling every 50 feet.
Charles says the change he's seen in the creek is evidence of land use changes upstream.
All the drainage out of the drain ditches and everything, they keep widening, cleaning, and draining more and more all the time, so it's faster.
You give a river more water to work with, it becomes more erosive. So we're seeing more sediment coming from places where the river kind of impacts a bank or a bluff.
Geologist Carrie Jennings.
We just tend to be in a hurry to move water off the landscape. No matter what we do on the surface, whether it's urbanizing an area or putting a roof on a lot or draining agricultural fields, it's all has the same effect, which is to hurry water to the stream, to get it there as quickly as possible.
Unfortunately, we're in the way of the city. All that drainage from the city is coming this way.
Clearly, Charles and others along the river are worried about the future of our namesake river.
When they get in and they let them develop like they're doing up on top here, they don't have any plans for that water, really. They'd really have to put in some really good control ponds to hold back some of that. And I doubt if they're going to do that because they don't want to go to the expense of doing that. They don't pay for the trouble it causes downstream.
Minnemissionona Creek has troubles, as we've seen, but it's not the only tributary of the Minnesota River with serious problems. And communities throughout the basin are going to great lengths to address their water quality challenges. The Upper Sioux community is one of them. The Upper Sioux community is on the Minnesota River near Granite Falls. Megan Ulrich is the community's water quality specialist. Today, she's headed to Hazel Creek, which meanders through the reservation on its way to the Minnesota River.
I sample this body of water monthly during the field season for little critters that live in the water called macroinvertebrates. These particular critters can only survive in really healthy water. And then group 3, these are pollution tolerant organisms, so they can live in any range of the water. Some of these critters live on the bottoms of rocks, some live in undercut banks, some live on the vegetation that's emerging out of the water. They can't run away from pollution, you know, so they're a very good indicator of water quality. You see how fast the water is running, so it's carrying a lot of the silt with it, and it's just fine and mucky. It's so fine that it clogs up my 500 micron net. And you can imagine if you have gills, what that does to you. It's easy to think of pollution as being like, oh, a chemical in the water like mercury or bacteria, but you know, when we're getting really big rain events and the water's really flashy and we have a large volume of water flowing through the river at once, that's a form of pollution. And when you have a lot of suspended sediment, that's another form of pollution. When you have so many different impacts, I think there's kind of like a perfect storm for all the life that's in the water.
Growing up along the Minnesota River, the water was clear and, you know, you could see the bottom of the river.
Carrie Schomer is an elder in the Upper Sioux community. She was born in a village along the river and has been an eyewitness to the river's changes.
Where I lived along the river bottoms down there, we used to go swimming in it. The turtles, you know, they would, you know, sometimes they would just come up and they'd be looking at you, you know, and then they'd go down. And
for 20 years, Carrie was a professor of the Dakota language at the University of Minnesota.
Sota means, you know, this clear. Minnesota. The translation for that is the reflection of the sky in the water. They translate it as the sky blue waters. And you know that the river is not sky blue anymore. It used to be.
This is just nuts to see the devastation on this bank and here, and just how many, you can see how many trees have come down because the bank's gone.
The Water Resources Center at Minnesota State Mankato also keeps tabs on Hazel Creek and the entire Minnesota River Basin.
We're involved with river and lake studies, monitoring water quality, looking at chemistry and biota. Water Resource Center, the SCOT.
The center collects data and publishes a report on the trends in water quality.
We do the State of the Minnesota River report, which comes out every 2 years. There are some trends that are improving, like phosphorus. We also know that some trends are static, like mussels.
Mussels, at one stage in their life, have to live in the gills of fish and amphibians because of the way they live and that they are filter feeders and travel on the bottom of the body of water. They're very sensitive to pollution and siltation. Oh, and I brought some of my mussel shells collected previously. We happen to know that many mussels are locally extinct in the Minnesota River.
At one time, historically, there was 42 mussels found in the Minnesota River Basin. Now we only find 23. But we also know that that 23 has been fairly stable for the last 10, 15 years. And some trends like nitrates, we know that they're rising.
Green algae usually indicates too much nitrate nitrogen in the water. Take Lake Titlow, a shallow prairie lake near Gaylord in Sibley County. For decades, it has not been swimmable or fishable.
I'm gonna grab my old rod and reel. I'm headed out towards the lake. Important plans I have to make.
There is some runoff from the city, but most of the water in Lake Titlow comes from streams on the west side of the lake that have been turned into agricultural drainage ditches. Geologist Bryce Hoppy.
The city itself has gone to extraordinary lengths over the last few years to make sure that their storm sewers don't drain into the lake anymore, right? So today we're here to install the weather and water quality monitoring station in Lake Titlow. The station allows us to link water quality parameters with weather parameters. How fast the rain falls has a lot to do with how much mud washes into the lake. That instrument that we lower into the lake tells us the temperature, the pH, the amount of oxygen in the water, the amount of solid mud that's suspended in the water. And it's hooked up to that modem, and we can call it up day and night and see what the lake's doing. We first post it on our websites at Minnesota State Mankato for everyone to see, so that people who live in the community can become engaged.
You put in 400 milliliters of the ferric.
Okay.
And
I grew up along the Minnesota River, and I'm extremely interested in learning more about this watershed and what is affecting this watershed and what I can do as a citizen to help improve the water quality and improve the environment that I live in.
Where, when, and by what processes the nutrients in the mud are washing into the lake. Once we understand that, we'll be able to go attack those problem areas and potentially do something about cleaning up the lake. A lake that's back to being a fishery, a lake that's back to being a waterfall habitat, a lake that can be used for recreation, for swimming and boating purposes. Right now, this lake doesn't meet any of those purposes.
Is it possible that this is where we had the news conference in '92?
Arnie Carlson said in 1992, we need to be able to swim, we need to be able to fish, picnic, recreate in this Minnesota River Basin.
But isn't that beautiful? Frankly, any river being polluted is a disgrace. And from a policy perspective, in terms of governmental management, can agencies work together towards some common goals, knowing full well that there's a lot of give and take? You know, the word compromise is not accepted in all political quarters these days, and that's unfortunate. But
I think we have a responsibility with what happens to how we treat the water that flows through our backyards and how it impacts people in other parts of the country.
Maybe now we might have the knowledge that we've been acquiring here, the driving force by the community members, plus the financial support from the state in order to actually start doing something about the amount of sediment and the nutrients that wash into this lake.
There'll be plenty of time to visit with the candidates.
It's August in 2010. There's a gubernatorial candidate forum at Farm Fest near Redwood Falls.
Everybody on Main Street, Minnesota knows that the health of Minnesota's economy depends on the health of agricultural economy.
Indeed, almost 4/5 of the land in the Minnesota River Valley is devoted to agriculture.
We're very dependent as a society worldwide on the food that's produced in the Minnesota River Basin.
Row crops and livestock generated more than $13 billion in 2009. Agriculture is Minnesota's second largest industry and accounts for 1/5 of our jobs.
The Minnesota River Basin up into the Red River Valley, there's what I would call the modern day Fertile Crescent, where we've got a combination of the right soils and climate and rainfall.
Prime agricultural soil with not a lot of stones. It also holds water. It's a glacial lake clay and silt, so you have to tile it to farm it.
Much of our drainage systems that have been installed are nothing more than stormwater removal systems, very similar to what most cities have. It's just a way of moving water off the landscape to make the land tillable.
But the faster flow of water from tile drainage has made farming the floodplain risky. Don Halverson used to farm the river bottoms near Montevideo. He experienced firsthand what happens when tiling increases on land upstream.
In '52, Benson area, a lot of the farms were half sloughs. That's when they started building ditches and draining all that, and then all that water comes down, and that's why it floods every year. It got so that it didn't pay to put in a crop anymore. This year was all farmland.
So Don Halverson decided to quit farming the floodplain and put his land in a conservation program.
Make it a wetlands. This way, when the floods, the flood water settles in here and saves it from going into the river or down to the Mississippi. And now see what it looks like. It's a sanctuary for birds and raising fish, deer, or turkeys, or pheasants, or ducks, or if you can hunt it all, you should be able to get something. It's worth a lot to me for the river, for my grandchildren and my neighbors.
In the years since he quit farming the floodplain, Halverson and his neighbors have continued working to improve water quality in the river. In 1992, Minnesota Governor Arne Carlson created a Citizens Advisory Committee to find ways to make the Minnesota River fishable and swimmable.
The Citizens Advisory Committee, painstakingly over the course of 2 years, put together a very comprehensive set of recommendations for the state of Minnesota to follow, what we call almost the 10 Commandments of cleaning up the Minnesota River. First of them was the river needed to have its natural floodplain restored, because there was really no reason to be farming in that floodplain. This is floodland, it's not cropland. So 4 of us from the Citizens Advisory Committee flew out to Washington, D.C.
And the availability of the federal dollars to focus on a watershed and try to make a major impact in improving water quality and habitat in that watershed was available through this Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program.
About a month later, the federal government put about $167 million up on the table as a little incentive for the state of Minnesota to get this cropped floodland out of production.
But the state needed about $80 million in matching funds to get the federal money.
Governor Carlson and his staff put this at the top of their agenda.
And we marched a lot of farmers up to the Capitol saying, we want this. They don't want to be in the floodplain farming.
Minnesota Farmers Union, the Farm Bureau, corn growers, soybean growers, pork producers, all of these groups in the end were supportive. The rare sort of once in a lifetime.
We're talking about 100,000 acres of floodland along the Minnesota River and its tributaries, which was taken out of production in the course of less than 2 years.
I think it was both citizens coming together with government, and it formed a partnership that I think will have a lasting impact on Minnesota.
5 to 10 years after that CREP program was in place, you could visibly see the difference in the Minnesota River. Many of the fish species that are sensitive to those high rates of sediment have returned. A lot of it had to do with CREP. CREP was huge.
Your committee was the first to break the hostility, if you will, between urban and non-urban on the environmental issues. And I think through your committee, which was representative of the totality of the state, and the coming together of the various agencies, I think it started to build bridges. And I think those bridges are frankly permanent.
And a great ending to a super project now that is being replicated across the United States. We did a nice job on that, but we got a lot of work to do yet.
Like everyone else, farmers want clean water too. And they're showing us new ways to grow food without making the water dirty.
This is the pond my dad put in 1973. This was a big ravine. We made an earthen dike, and it catches all the silt and everything before it hits the river.
In picking sites, that's definitely something to look at.
And he carries on the conservation ethic he learned from his father.
And I was at a meeting Leonard Binstock put on about ways that tile lines were going to be changing.
Today is the first day for building a wood chip bioreactor at the edge of Carl's Fields. With cost-share funds, county, state, and federal agencies are working with Carl to make the water cleaner coming from his drain tile.
It's a relatively simple concept. It's capturing water from tile lines long enough so that it breaks down nutrients before it gets discharged to the stream.
The use of a bioreactor has so many advantages in the removal of the nutrients, the phosphorus, the nitrates that do percolate through the ground.
You have to maintain our ground so that is beneficial to everybody.
The Minnesota comes south.
Audrey Arner surveys her farm on the blufflands of the valley near Lac qui Parle. She and her husband, Richard Handine, quit farming corn and soybeans way back in the 1970s.
We had been spending time with farmers who were affiliated with the Land Stewardship Project and the Sustainable Farming Association of Minnesota, and many of those mentors affected our decision-making to manage grasslands. In doing that, we have learned to take the lesson from the Great Prairies, which has been to perennialize and to diversify.
They think of their farm as a water catchment zone, and they built a dam to hold the storm water and make a pond.
Since we have perennialized the landscape, the springs run year-round. There's just less volume of water in the stream, even after a high rainfall event, because we're holding more of it. We don't apply phosphorus. We keep our animals some distance from the waterways so that much of the nutrient that comes from them is absorbed in the paddocks. So that's pretty darn clear water by the time it hits the culvert.
Audrey says the water in their pond is swimmable and fishable.
Most farmers love the land, and they may not all understand ecosystem processes in the same way, but I think it's really important to listen to one another with an open heart, to foster biological diversity, to cycle nutrients in a way that doesn't contaminate the river, and to effectively conserve our precious water resources.
It's time we all understand that it's what we do on land that makes our water what it is today. This simple fact is true. It's controlled by me and you. It's time to fix the mistakes of yesterday.
Without proper treatment, human sewage, what we all flush down the toilet, has been a major contributor to pollution of the Minnesota River. As recently as 1996, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency identified 40 incorporated communities in the valley that required improvements in their sewage systems. The city of Boyd, located in the Lac Paparo watershed, was one of them.
We needed to get this sewer system done because we had old septic tanks and so forth, and those things are real old. We want to kind of, clean up the environment besides taking care of our own sewage problems. So when you get flooding, well then of course with all that surface waters, well then the pollutants go in. So that's why we're happy to like I say, to get rid of those septic tanks and so forth, so that pollutant is not available for floodwaters.
That's the one for our sewer. We have to have special reports that are due every year that they will follow up on. Anytime you get grant money, you have to follow all their rules and regulations, and they check on you to make sure that you are doing that. So we do that. Yeah. We'll be doing reports for the next 40 years because of these grants for both sewer and water. So.
And do you think it's worth it?
Well, yes. If you had seen our water before and our sewer problems, yeah, we needed this, and it's good. We need it, and it helps the city.
Communities throughout the valley, working together with state and federal agencies, have been improving the ways they handle sewage water. Today, problems remain in some unincorporated communities and individual septic systems, but every single one of the 40 incorporated communities has been fixed.
It's time to fix the mistakes of yesterday.
Some communities, like the Upper Sioux community near Granite Falls, installed a state-of-the-art sewage treatment facility.
All the wastewater is filtered and circulated through this drain field. And the fenced-in portion down there is reconstructed wetland. We sample the water here to make sure that it's working properly. And I sample the river downstream of the drain field and above stream to make sure that the community is not negatively impacting the river with their wastewater.
The Upper Sioux community also worked with state and federal agencies and the Shakopee-Mdewakanton Sioux community to slow down the storm water running across the parking lots of Prairie's Edge Casino.
Well, in 2003, we moved our enterprise up here on top from down below in the floodplain area, and the issue was the overland runoff and the erosion that you could visibly see out into the lower areas of our tribal lands. And to overcome those difficulties, we created a storm sewer system which runs around the perimeter of the casino and the parking lot, and it channels all of that water into our holding pond back here. And when it gets to a certain level, it releases it down through the valley, through a riprap scenario down to historic wetlands.
We're treating, I would say, a substantial portion of the water, especially in an urban area. When, in the early 80s, national urban runoff pollutant standards were developed, and that's where all the ponds started to be built. Those are designed to provide a certain level of pollutant removal before it enters a creek or a lake.
The 9 Mile Creek Watershed District, which includes parts of Bloomington, Edina, and other western suburbs, has new rules for handling runoff.
We want the first inch of runoff to be retained on site. And so that's where porous asphalt parking lots or driveways, it could be rain gardens. Rain gardens are being incorporated into commercial developments, municipal projects as we see here, as well as private residential projects.
You'll see where the water filters down and it goes out into the street right over here. And down the 9 Mile Creek, comes out clear. And the 9 Mile Creek is, by the way, one of the cleanest in the country here. And we watch it pretty close and monitor it, keep the trash out of there, and everybody respects it.
Residents in the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District support the new policies to slow down the water.
All you had to do was sign up for it, and then they would come and do the work as long as they were putting the street in. It's been a year right now, and it's really worked out. We've had more people stop and take pictures of it.
The Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge was one of the first created in an urban area. This 14,000-acre expanse of green space, from Fort Snelling to Belle Plaine and beyond, was the creation of citizens working together with public officials, agency professionals, and willing landowners.
Well, it all goes to the Minnesota River. So.
We learned the story last summer when the Refuge Visitor Center was reopened after construction to make it one of the most energy-efficient public buildings in Minnesota.
Well, I'd like to welcome you all this afternoon to Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge.
Together with the Mississippi National River Recreation Area are two priceless treasures in our metropolitan area.
The species variety that's able to live in this valley is amazing.
This is our catbird.
This is a gray catbird.
As children, every Sunday after church, we would spend the whole afternoon in the watersheds looking for virgin prairie, and we were actually cataloging all the plants, mushrooms, trees, birds. You didn't know that? Yeah.
Oh yeah, we also brought garbage bags.
Yeah, and we picked up garbage.
We picked up trash, yep.
It's a white-breasted nuthatch.
I was on the Fish and Wildlife Service's national planning team, and we were planning national wildlife refuges all over the nation. And driving across the river every day and seeing this big, wonderful natural area, and thought it should be a national wildlife refuge. And we also knew in order to sell it was to include a recreation and interpretation and wildlife observation component. At the time, many of the cities had zoned the floodplain for development, which would have destroyed the natural conditions.
If we didn't protect these areas, we'd look more like the East. It'd all be industrialized. And those people like to fish and hunt. The majesty of nature, all those gifts that we had here in Minnesota could have been lost.
In order to get this one going, I enlisted the support of my hunting partner, Dick Dury. We crossed the river and got help from Elaine Malott and the Bloomington Natural Resources Commission. Elaine was the chairperson. So I knew how she operated and how effective she was.
And when Elaine Malott and Mary Alice saw, the value of bringing a citizens committee to try to make this a national wildlife refuge, we were pretty well primed.
And then Elaine and myself and a few others presented it to Senator Mondale, and he offered to introduce it if we could get endorsement up and down the river.
We went to all of the schools in our age range, so all of the senior highs, all of the junior highs.
We went up and down the river. We must have made about 30 or 40 presentations getting endorsements.
Walking street by street and talking to people about it to get that kind of neighborhood and community support.
And it was a really important civic message that we carried to the elementary, junior high, and senior highs was that you can make a difference.
People understood the value and the importance of having some natural woodland and natural areas for the native animals that live here.
Then we took that back to Mondale and showed him that there was community support, and finally he introduced the legislation, after he had a hearing out here.
I had the honor of being the one to present the book, The Lorax, to the congressman at that point and ask them to read it because it had a lot of the values and how we felt about the area, that we needed to speak for the trees.
I have very pleasant recollections about that hearing. I think it helped.
Being a young person, you see the older people there, that for Mr. Oberstar to say that he had an 8-year-old son and that son would read the book to him and explain it to him.
It was Congressman Oberstar that really saved the day because he was chairman of the subcommittee in Congress that had to authorize it.
I think it's fair to say that there was no serious, powerful opposition to the establishment of this wildlife refuge. It was the area that we needed to protect. The professionals that helped shape it knew what they were doing.
But we had enough political muscle with Mondale and Oberstar to get it introduced into Congress and eventually passed.
Just think, just over the lip of that airport with the highways going by, and yet tremendous, tremendous wildlife area.
And this planet is here for all of us to enjoy, but we need to take care of it in order for it to be there long term.
At that time, there wasn't much talk at all about improving water quality. And since then, there's been a lot more attention paid to it.
I'm Julie and Mary Alice's daughter.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, so I knew you from a long time.
The refuge is sort of a barometer of the health of the Minnesota River. Stormwater, sewage, sedimentation, pesticides, all of that impacts the refuge.
Ready?
And in a way, the establishment of the wildlife refuge was the first important step in the increased attention to the Minnesota River.
The land that makes up the refuge was purchased from willing landowners. Today, through partnerships with the Minnesota Valley Trust and others, the refuge is turning marginal farmland into wetlands.
So what we're looking at here today is this is Lincoln Waterfowl Production Area. This was 320 acres that was for sale. And I looked at it and I said, wow. And all these blue outlines here represent what we thought were historic wetlands on this property. There'll be basically about 45 or 50 acre wetland right in here. And then there'll be about 60 to 80 small wetlands surrounding this area. 1 acre wetland can hold over 350,000 gallons of water. Tremendous storage also happens in these surrounding uplands. These native grasses are 8 or 10 feet deep, these roots. And so they have a tremendous kind of a sponge effect on water quality downstream. One of the main reasons why we're really interested in working with our partners in the Minnesota River watershed is because the heart of the Minnesota actually comes right through Bloomington. And so whenever we're doing work in the Minnesota River watershed, we're in essence improving that water quality, which is 100 miles away downstream.
Anything that's done to improve the water quality and environmental quality of the river valley upstream is going to help this refuge as well as the upper Mississippi refuge, starting at Lake Pepin and going down to the Gulf of Mexico.
There you go. Oh, yeah, nice catfish. Hey, and my other bobber's going down.
Scott Sparlin has been fishing the Minnesota River since his college days when he moved to New Ulm. Sparlin started the New Ulm area's Sport Fishermen Club in 1987. That group, which became the Coalition for a Clean Minnesota River, has led the way in improving the fishing in the river.
Good luck.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks.
This afternoon, the last day of the walleye season, Scott's got plenty of company on the ice.
This river's got big walleyes in it.
Al Swuck almost got a state record walleye down here.
Well, 29.
29, yeah, I got mine right.
In the summer, I got 2 10s there on the wall at home.
Right there on the wallpaper.
Yeah.
28 3/4 and 26 1/4 inches.
All summer, I catch walleye too.
Yep.
Down at Riverside. On that sandbar there.
Yep.
I love that. It's so fun.
It's just gorgeous out there. Can't beat it, you know.
You don't have to go up to Mille Lacs. You don't have to go anywhere. You can just fish. It's right in town.
Right downtown New Ulm.
Secret spot.
If the fishing is getting better, that must mean the water is getting cleaner. Here near 7 Mile Creek, between Mankato and St. Peter, DNR fishery scientists are studying that hypothesis. Using a small charge of electricity, they stun, catch, and record the size and species of the fish they find.
$3.25.
From emerald shiners to flathead catfish.
We easily identify a walleye or a catfish as being valuable because we catch and eat sport fish. The health and well-being of the fish that we desire is dependent on the diversity and the availability of these other species to these sport fish.
All right, channel cat, 770.
We take some basic water chemistry stuff. Like now I'm just looking at the clarity so we got an idea how far we can see in the water when we're doing the shocking.
With electrofishing, it's all about being able to see down into the water.
And on here it reads 19 centimeters. This goes up to 60. If you can see more than 60, it's really clear, obviously. And 19's so-so. It's not great, but it's not terrible bad either.
Recently, as the 50s, a professor at the university that wrote a book about the distribution of Minnesota fishes did seine hulls out there and really found peas and carrots from canning factories as well as human waste from unsewered communities in his seine hulls, and not surprisingly, very few fish.
And that fish weighs 465. By taking those scales, we just get to see how many year classes there are. If we're seeing multiple year classes, we know we've got reproduction going on somewhere in the system. Boy, they're in great shape.
Fish communities integrate all the decisions that are made on the land. And so if you've got a habitat and water quality sensitive species like a paddlefish or a blue sucker or black buffalo, these are indications that there's enough high quality habitat for some of these species to start re-entering the river and hopefully start having self-reproducing populations.
Beautiful shape, so robust.
Recent surveys have showed over 70 different species of fish are now found in the Minnesota River. Some of them are really sensitive to water quality and other habitat parameters.
I've been impressed so far. I mean, we've really had a lot of species here. I mean, we're probably at 25 to 30 species of fish, and that's diversity, and good things are at least beginning to occur here in Minnesota.
We certainly got to be watching the fish in it because that's one of the big recreational aspects of the river. The public's starting to demand that they want us to be out here working on this resource and taking care of it, and they should, because this is a tremendous resource and it's getting more and more attention all the time.
They're actually one of the species that they do target out here, especially even as you get down toward the cities. I actually got second in the Belle Plaine fishing contest with that one. That's the handle.
I think just the average Joe can go out to the river. Like I said, when I was a kid, I can tell you what it was like where I used to fish, and I can go down there now, and there's a marked improvement. I can see it, and I know it.
In the state of Minnesota, walleyes and lakes have tended to be a higher priority for us to manage. But we're starting to invest more time in our major rivers and more time in our river and stream resources as we can. Rivers and streams connected to lakes, that connectivity of resources is really, really important for the health of our fisheries.
Indeed, declining sediment levels and reduced phosphorus pollution are improving the health of the fish in the Minnesota River and its tributaries. An example, since it was started in 1975, the Belle Plaine River Fishing Tournament has been a good place to see how the fish are doing.
Susie did get 2 catfish.
I'm the only one that got catfish.
3 pounds, 10 ounces, and 3 pounds, 4 ounces.
We caught a couple little catfish, a couple carp.
I've taken second in the past. I didn't catch a catfish that weighed anything. I caught 5 sturgeon.
In a unique way, the tournament provides a chance to measure the results of their stewardship efforts.
This gentleman right here took first about
1988,
34 and a half.
92, I think, was 42 pounds, 14 ounces. 2007 was 51.9, and 2008 was 50 pounds, 2 ounces.
Lee Sunmark works with DNR Fisheries in Hutchinson.
For Minnesota, the flathead catfish are really a kind of a world-class trophy fish, and the fish in the Minnesota River are second biggest only to the ones in the Mississippi River. And there aren't many fisheries like this anywhere in the country, let alone the world.
The Skelly family and their friends in Belle Plaine turned their love of fishing,
Since I was a wee lad, I've been running around it.
into a community celebration.
We saw too many fishermen from Iowa here, and we thought there should be some more local people fishing.
We wanted to bring some attention to the river, and the more attention you have, the
hopefully they can clean it up.
The biggest fish we have here today is a little over 45 pounds.
It doesn't look any bigger now.
When anglers bring them in, if they want to keep them, they can keep them up to their license. If they want to just turn them over to us, we take care of them and get them back to the river.
The people that care mostly about the fish are the ones that fish for them. So there's a lot more sportsmanship, a lot more people that care for the fish.
I think there's some big fish in here. Just got to be lucky to get them.
People are way more conscious about how to treat the fish. They bring them in great big tubs and coolers. I think every fisherman's got a designated fish cooler. Maybe some of them put their beer in there first, I don't know.
Over the years, people have learned how to fish the river better, and
you can see we've got the DNR here now, and they're from the fishery department.
We've been working at the Franklin Catfish Derby days for more than 2 decades, and we just thought we'd plug ourselves in here too to be helpful to the tournament and to care for the fish.
Oh my gosh, look at that. I know.
Well, it's really great that kids are so dang excited about this stuff. We don't want them to handle the fish too much, so there's kind of a balancing act that we do here.
How big is the biggest one? 45.5.
people go up north and they spend a lot of money to catch a big fish, and they're never as big as the ones we can get right here locally.
It's all about the camaraderie. I have many friends back here, and it's a great tradition. I get to spend a night on the river with my boys. They love to fish, and I just love it, love it, love it. I look forward to this just as I would Christmas. It's fishing.
You know, nothing says Minnesota more than fishing. And in the Minnesota River these days, the fishing is better, the fish are bigger, and there's more of them. And you can eat them. Get this, the fish consumption advisories for walleye in the Minnesota River are the same as those in the upper Mississippi. So, bon appetit. Well, that concludes our story about the folks working to preserve the Minnesota River. And after these years, we know this: working together, we are saving the Minnesota River. Thanks for watching.
To learn how you can help save the Minnesota River, visit minriver.net.
The next thing that you know, the whole town was involved at doing all the things to get the river's problem solved. They were cleaning and a-dreaming what the river could become. And while they were working, they were having lots of fun. Cleaning up, yelling, cleaning up. Well, the kids told me we'll do it. We better get down to it, clean it up. Well, the kids told me we'll do it. We better get down to it, clean it up.